I want to start with the house. Not with my husband. Not with the secrets. Not with what we found buried at the back of the property behind the tree line. I want to start with the house, because the house is where all of it begins. It was white with green shutters. 2 stories. A wraparound porch that looked out over a valley so beautiful it made you feel, the first time you saw it, like everything was going to be okay. I stood on that porch on our first evening in Harlow Creek, Vermont, and breathed cold September air and felt, for exactly 40 seconds, something I had not felt in over a year. Peace. Then my husband called my name from inside. And the 40 seconds ended. What I did not know, standing on that porch with the valley spread out below me like a promise, was that my husband had chosen this town on purpose. That he had a reason for being here that had nothing to do with fresh starts. That the house I was about to sleep in for the first time was sitting on top of something that had been waiting 37 years to be found. And what I did not know about myself, what I would only come to understand much later, in the long and difficult months that followed, was that I had chosen him partly because we were the same. Because we were both people who carried things quietly and called it strength. My name is Nora Voss. I am 36 years old. And what happened to my husband and me in Harlow Creek is the kind of story I used to think only happened to other people. Let me tell you all of it. Even the parts that don't reflect well on either of us. Especially those parts. We arrived on a Saturday in early September, when Vermont had just begun its slow, magnificent transformation from green to gold. The drive from Philadelphia had taken 14 hours, broken by one stop at a rest area in Connecticut where Daniel and I sat across from each other at a plastic table with bad coffee and did not talk about the things we weren't talking about. We had become very skilled at that by then. At the comfortable, necessary surface of a conversation. At talking around the shape of what we were both carrying the way you might walk around furniture in a dark room. Carefully, from memory, without turning on a light. The town of Harlow Creek appeared through the windshield like something from a painting. Main Street was 3 blocks long. A diner with a hand-lettered sign, a hardware store, a post office, a small library that had once been a feed store. The trees lining the road were just beginning to turn at the edges, the first amber and red appearing like a slow stain in the green, beautiful and slightly ominous in the way that all things are ominous when you are already on edge. I pressed my hand flat against the passenger window and looked at all of it. "It's quiet," I said. "That's the point," Daniel said. He was right. Quiet was the point. We had chosen Harlow Creek from a list of the most affordable small towns in New England. Population 1,400, no direct highway, an hour and 20 minutes from Burlington, because we needed somewhere that had no memory of who we were before. Somewhere the past couldn't follow. Or so we told ourselves. The house was on the eastern edge of town, where Cliffside Road climbed slightly and then leveled off into a wooded half-acre. White colonial, green shutters, built in the 1940s. The kitchen had wallpaper with small blue roosters on it. The master bedroom closet had a door that didn't quite close. The realtor had apologized for both. But the porch. That wraparound porch, and the view from its west-facing corner, the valley below in the September light, all amber and copper and that deep Vermont green, was the thing that had made me say yes when Daniel showed me the listing online. Before I had thought too carefully about it. Before my better judgment caught up with my first instinct. I stood on that porch our first evening and breathed in air so clean it almost hurt and let myself, for 40 seconds, believe that we were going to be all right. Then Daniel called my name. I went inside. He was standing in the hallway, looking at the wall beside the staircase. The previous owners, a family named Aldrich, the realtor had mentioned, who had left in a hurry, had left behind a row of framed photographs. The realtor had said to dispose of them however we liked, that the Aldriches had specifically said not to bother forwarding them. I had assumed they were generic family pictures. The kind that accumulate in a house over decades. Daniel was looking at one specific photograph with an expression I had learned, over 7 years of marriage, to recognize and be wary of. Still. Focused. The expression he wore when something was bothering him that he had not yet decided how or whether to tell me. I came and stood beside him. The photograph was black and white. Old, 1970s, judging by the quality and the clothing. 7 men standing in a field, a tree line behind them. 6 of them facing the camera. 1 at the far left looking off to the side, out of frame, at something only he could see. At the bottom of the photograph, barely visible, was what appeared to be a mound of freshly turned earth. The kind you see when something has recently gone into the ground. I looked at it for a moment. Weird thing to leave on the wall, I said. Yeah, Daniel said. He said nothing else. I waited. He offered nothing more. I went back to unpacking. I would think about that photograph many times in the weeks that followed. I would think about the way Daniel had looked at it, not with the puzzled curiosity of a man seeing something unfamiliar, but with the particular stillness of a man seeing something he already knew. I didn't understand that yet. I would. Harlow Creek introduced itself slowly, the way cautious people do, a little at a time, watching your face as it went to see what you could handle. The neighbors came in the first week. 3 other houses sat on Cliffside Road, each separated by a comfortable stretch of trees. First came Greta Sims, from the house across the road. 61 years old, retired schoolteacher, short silver hair and the careful observant eyes of someone who had learned, over a long life in a small place, to watch closely and trust slowly. She brought a pie and I liked her immediately, which in my experience means a person is either genuinely trustworthy or very good at making you feel that way. With Greta, I would come to understand it was both. Then Walt and Bev Calhoun from the end of the road, married 42 years, finishing each other's sentences, bringing maple syrup and a friendliness so genuine it was almost disorienting after a year of city living where nobody looked at you on the street. And then, on the 5th day, a man named Sheriff Roy Pruitt came by. He wasn't in uniform. Jeans, flannel shirt, coffee cake wrapped in foil. He had the easy, practiced manner of a man who had spent his life making people feel comfortable because it was professionally useful to him. He smiled with his whole face and looked at me with eyes that were warm on the surface and measuring underneath. Just wanted to welcome the new arrivals, he said. He told me the house had been empty 8 months before we arrived. Before that, the Aldrich family for 6 years. Before that, empty for nearly a decade. Why so long? I asked. Old properties take time, he said smoothly. He did not elaborate. I noted that he did not elaborate. How are you finding Harlow Creek? He asked. Quiet, I said. We like quiet. Most people who come here do, he said. He glanced past me into the hallway, a quick, practiced scan. Your husband home? Working, I said. Daniel had set up in the back bedroom. Of course, Pruitt said. He handed me the coffee cake. You need anything, anything at all. My number's in the book. He smiled again. Harlow Creek takes care of its own. He said it warmly, like a reassurance. I thanked him and watched him walk back down the porch steps and get into his truck and drive away. Then I stood in the doorway for a moment, coffee cake in hand, thinking about the way he had said those words. Harlow Creek takes care of its own. Something about the phrase sat at an angle, like a picture hung slightly crooked. Not enough to alarm you. Just enough that you keep glancing back at it. I started taking morning coffee with Greta Sims in the 2nd week, and it became, without either of us formally deciding it, a daily habit. She had a wood stove running by 7 a.m. and always made twice what she needed, and we would sit on her porch in the cool Vermont mornings with our mugs while the mist burned off the valley below and she would talk and I would listen. I have always believed that the best way to understand a place is to let it speak before you ask questions. Greta spoke carefully and with purpose, the way people speak when they have been carrying a story for a long time and have finally found someone who seems like they can hold it. She told me about Harlow Creek in layers. The surface first, the history, the founding families, the way the town had grown and then settled in the late 20th century into the quiet, self-contained place it was now. Then the middle layer, the personalities, the tensions, the way small towns develop grooves and rhythms that outsiders take years to read. And then, one morning in our 3rd week, the underneath. She told me about a family called the Aldriches. My predecessors in the house on Cliffside Road. They had stayed 6 years, long enough that the town had almost stopped noticing them. Then the youngest daughter, a woman of 34, had begun sleepwalking. Not into hallways or stairwells the way sleepwalkers usually do. Outside. Into the yard. Always to the same spot, the northeast corner of the property, near the back tree line. She would wake up there on the cold ground with her hands in the dirt. Like she had been digging. I wrapped both hands around my mug and kept my voice even. That's a stress response, I said. Sleepwalking in adults is usually. I know what it usually is, Greta said, not unkindly. I taught school for 30 years. I've seen stress in children and adults and every stage between. This was different. She looked at me steadily. She knew when she woke up that she was supposed to be there. She couldn't explain how she knew. She just did. The Aldriches had moved out in February. Left most of their furniture. The daughter was in Portland now and did not discuss it. And before them, Greta said, before the house sat empty for 10 years, there was a man named Warren Cross. The name landed in the conversation like a stone dropped into still water. Even the sound of it felt significant somehow, though I couldn't have said exactly why. Warren Cross had lived in the house on Cliffside Road for 20 years. He had been raising a daughter alone. His wife had died when the girl was small. He grew vegetables. He had 3 cats. He was, by all accounts, a quiet and decent man who minded his own business and was liked by the people who knew him. In the summer of 1987, he had apparently found something. Records, Greta thought, though she was hazy on the details. Something connected to town business and town money. He had gone to a lawyer in Burlington. 3 weeks later, Warren Cross had vanished. His car was still in the driveway. Breakfast half eaten on the table. The cats were meowing at the back door. Sheriff Gerald Pruitt, Roy Pruitt's father, the previous generation of Pruitts keeping the peace in Harlow Creek, had investigated and concluded within 2 weeks that Warren Cross had left town voluntarily. 2 weeks, I said. 2 weeks, Greta said. We looked at each other. He had a daughter, I said. He had a vegetable garden. He had 3 cats, Greta said. You don't leave cats, Nora. I set down my mug. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She looked at me for a long, measuring moment. Because I have been watching people move into that house for 40 years, she said. And I am tired of watching them leave frightened. I thought if someone knew the shape of what was there before they stumbled into it, they might be better prepared. Prepared for what? I asked. She looked out at the thin line of Cliffside Road. At the white corner of my house just visible through the trees. For what the house remembers, she said quietly. I drove home that morning in silence. I sat in the car in our driveway before going inside and looked at the house. The white walls, the green shutters, the porch where I had stood on the first evening and felt peace for 40 seconds. And I thought, what is underneath you? I started going to the Harlow Creek Public Library the following week. The library was one large room run by a man named Ozias Fenn, somewhere between 60 and 80, white-bearded, with a particular calm of a person who has read so much that the world has become slightly less surprising than it is to other people. He had been archiving the town's history for decades. Not because anyone had commissioned him to. Because he believed, quietly and firmly, that the past has a right to exist on record regardless of whether the present finds that convenient. I told him I was researching the history of our property on Cliffside Road. He looked at me over his glasses for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went to the back room and returned with a folder. Inside, newspaper clippings from the Harlow Creek Gazette, 1987. A land registry document. 2 photographs. The first clipping was brief and dry. Local resident Warren Cross, 44, reported missing by neighbors. Sheriff's office investigating. The second clipping, 2 weeks later. Sheriff concludes Warren Cross left town voluntarily. No evidence of foul play. I read that second headline 3 times. 2 weeks, I said, the same thing I had said to Greta. Ozias said nothing. He simply watched me. I turned to the photographs. The first was Warren Cross himself, tall, lean, dark beard, kind eyes. Standing on the front porch of my house, one hand raised against the afternoon sun, squinting slightly and almost smiling, the way people smile when they are comfortable exactly where they are. I looked at that photograph for a long time. At this man who had stood on my porch and had no idea what was coming for him. I picked up the second photograph. And the world shifted underneath me. It was a group photograph. 7 men standing in a field. A tree line behind them. I had seen this photograph before. On my hallway wall. The black and white version. The one Daniel had been staring at on our first evening in the house, with that expression I had recognized and worried about and not yet understood. This was the same photograph. In color. Better quality. Taken later, maybe, or a different occasion, the same group. The faces were visible. 6 men looking at the camera. One looking away, to the side. I studied each face in turn. Methodically. The way I do everything when I need to be sure. And then I stopped. 4th from the left. 30 or 40 years old in this photograph. Dark hair. A particular set to the jaw and the shoulders that I would know in any photograph, any lighting, any decade. I sat very still. Because I was looking at a man I had known my entire marriage. I was looking at Robert Voss. My husband's father. I want to tell you exactly what went through my mind on the drive home from the library that afternoon, because I think it matters. The first thing I felt was not anger. It was not even shock, exactly. It was something colder and more clarifying, the sensation of a thing you had almost known for a long time finally snapping into focus. Like your eyes adjusting to a dark room and the shapes you had been uncertain about resolving suddenly into furniture, into walls, into the specific and undeniable geography of a place you are standing in. I thought about the way Daniel had chosen this town. He had presented it to me as accidental. He had found it on a list, he had said. Affordable. Remote. Quiet. I had believed him because I was preoccupied with my own reasons for needing to leave Philadelphia, and because I trusted my husband in the specific, practical way of a person who has shared a life with someone long enough to stop questioning every decision. I thought about the photograph on the hallway wall. The way he had stared at it. The way he had said weird thing to leave on the wall in a voice that I now understood had been the voice of a man performing unfamiliarity. I thought about the 9 years of our relationship. The things I knew about Robert Voss, Daniel's father, who had died before Daniel and I met, who Daniel spoke of rarely and with a careful, edited brevity that I had attributed to grief and now understood was something else entirely. I pulled into our driveway. I sat in the car for 10 minutes. Here is what I decided, in those 10 minutes. I was not going to panic. I was not going to arrive inside that house in pieces. I was a woman who had spent 12 years as a social worker navigating situations where the stakes were high and the ground was unreliable and the people in front of me were frightened and hiding things. And I had learned, in those 12 years, that the most useful thing you can be in a crisis is the calmest person in the room. I would be calm. I would go inside. And I would ask my husband what he knew. Daniel was finishing a work call in the back bedroom. I could hear the low murmur of his voice through the closed door. I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I stood at the window and looked out at the backyard, the slope down to the creek, the tree line at the far edge of the property, and I breathed slowly and deliberately and waited. The call ended at 5:30. The back bedroom door opened. His footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at me and stopped. He knew. The moment he saw my face, he knew. I have thought about that moment many times since. About the fact that he didn't try to brazen it out. Didn't produce a smile and say how was your day. He simply stopped in the doorway and looked at me with an expression that held something I had not seen in it before. Not guilt exactly. Something older and heavier than guilt. The look of a man who has been waiting for a particular moment for a very long time and has just understood that it has arrived. I went to the library today, I said. My voice was level. I've been looking into the history of this property. into a man named Warren Cross who disappeared from this house in 1987. I watched his face carefully. I found a photograph. Daniel. A group photograph. 7 men standing in the field behind our property. I paused. Your father was one of them. The color left his face slowly and completely, the way light leaves a room when a cloud passes over the sun. He said nothing. How long have you known? I asked. He came into the kitchen. He sat down at the table and put both hands flat on the surface, the way a man braces himself when the ground is moving. 9 years, he said. I absorbed that. You knew before we met, I said. Yes. You knew when we got married. Yes. And this town. My voice stayed even. It cost me something to keep it even. You chose this town specifically. From everything in New England, you chose Harlow Creek. He looked at his hands on the table. Yes, he said. I turned back to the window. I looked at the tree line in the darkening afternoon light. At the back acre. At the place where the creek caught the last of the sun. Tell me everything, I said. All of it. From the beginning. And Daniel. I turned and looked at him directly. If I find out afterward that you left anything out, I will not recover from that. Do you understand me? He looked at me. Yes, he said. And he told me. He was 19 years old when his father told him. Robert Voss, then 61, dying of pancreatic cancer, 4 months from the end, had waited until Daniel's mother was asleep and then sat his son down at the kitchen table and told him a story without apology and without visible emotion, in a voice so steady and even that Daniel said it had frightened him more than weeping would have. Robert Voss had grown up in Vermont, in and around Harlow Creek. He had left in his 30s, met Daniel's mother, built a life in Philadelphia, become a quiet man who grew roses and worked in insurance and had never, in Daniel's memory, seemed like anything other than ordinary. But when Robert was young, he had been part of a group. 7 men who had grown up together in Harlow Creek and stayed connected into adulthood through the specific, binding loyalty of men who had shared a history and a place. One of those men had a business. Carver Property Solutions, a company that purchased town land and development rights and had, over a number of years, been using its relationships with town officials to acquire those rights at well below their value. Money moved in directions it was not supposed to move. Officials were paid. Records were kept in ways designed to obscure what was happening. Warren Cross had found out. Warren Cross was an accountant. He had been hired by the town to review several years of financial records, and he had found the irregularities, and he had followed them, and he had documented them, and he had contacted a lawyer in Burlington. My husband's father sat at his kitchen table on a winter night in his last months of life and told his 19-year-old son what the group of 7 men had decided to do about Warren Cross. He never used the explicit word. He said, "We made a decision. Warren Cross was taken care of. He is on that property, the house on Cliffside Road. All 7 of us put him there. And I am telling you because I cannot carry it alone into the ground and because you are my son and because I have always told myself that one day someone would have to do something about it." Then he had said nothing more about it for the 4 months before he died. He had handed Daniel the weight and then let death remove him from the consequences of having handed it over. Daniel had carried it for 9 years. I sat across from my husband at the kitchen table in our house in Harlow Creek, Vermont, and I listened to all of this. I did not interrupt. I let him finish. I let him tell me about the markers he had found along the back tree line. 7 stones, evenly spaced, carved with symbols, that he had photographed and said nothing about. I let him tell me that he had recognized the field in the hallway photograph on our very first night, that he had taken it off the wall and hidden it at the bottom of his suitcase. When he was done, the kitchen was very quiet. I looked at my hands on the table. Here is what I felt. I want to be precise about it because I think the complexity of it is the point. I was angry. A deep, structural anger at being used, at being brought to a place under the pretense of a shared decision when in fact I had been moved like a piece on a board I didn't know I was on. That anger was real and it was justified and it did not go away quickly. But underneath the anger was something else. Something I had not expected. Recognition. Because I was not myself, a woman without hidden things. I had my own weight. The shared secret that had precipitated our move in the first place. The thing that had happened 18 months earlier. The reason we had needed to leave Philadelphia. The reason I had been on a leave of absence from a job I had loved for 12 years. I had not brought that secret to this town. It had followed me here. And Daniel had been carrying it beside me, silently, for 18 months, without complaint and without use of it against me. He had kept my secret. And he had been waiting, in his way, however wrongly, however cowardly, to do something about his own. I do not say this to excuse him. I want to be very clear about that. What he did, bringing me here without full disclosure, using our marriage as the vehicle for a reckoning he hadn't asked my permission to include me in, was a serious thing. It damaged my trust in a way that took a long time and a great deal of work to repair. But I understood it. Two people who carry heavy things quietly tend to find each other. There is a gravitational pull between people who know how to hold weight without showing it. It can be a beautiful thing between two people who are honest with each other about what they are carrying. It can also be this. I looked up from the table. Is there anything else? I asked. Anything at all that I don't know? He thought about it carefully. I watched him think about it, and I believed, watching him, that he was being genuinely thorough. No, he said. I nodded. Then I need you to listen to me, I said. Because I am going to tell you what we are going to do. And I am not asking, Daniel. I am telling you. Because this is my life too, and I will not be a passenger in it again. He held my gaze. Tell me, he said. I did not sleep that night. Daniel fell into an exhausted, wrung-out sleep around 2 in the morning, and I lay beside him in the dark and listened to the house. To the sounds an old house makes. The tick and settle of it, the way the wind moves around it, the occasional far-off sound of the creek at the back of the property. I thought about Warren Cross. 44 years old. An accountant. A father raising a daughter alone. A man who had found something wrong and had made the choice, the costly, fatal, decent choice, to do something about it. I thought about his daughter. She would be in her early 50s now. She had grown up in the world without her father. She had grown up in a world where the people who took him had never been held accountable. Where the town had continued and the seasons had continued and the record said he had left voluntarily, as though he had simply decided one morning that the life he had built meant nothing and he would walk away from it. I thought about Ozias Fenn at the library. The way he had looked at me over his glasses before bringing out the folder. The way he had not elaborated when I noted the 2-week timeline of the investigation. As though he had been waiting for a question he didn't want to ask unprompted. And I thought about Roy Pruitt. His easy smile. His coffee cake. His grandfather who had closed the case in 2 weeks and his father who had kept the peace and Roy himself, 3rd generation, still keeping it. Harlow Creek takes care of its own. By 4 in the morning I had a clear and specific plan. I am a social worker by training and by nature, and the thing social work teaches you is this. Systems are not changed by outrage. They are changed by documentation, by process, by the careful building of a record that is thorough enough to withstand challenge. I knew how to build a record. I got up at 5. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down everything Daniel had told me and everything I had found. Names. Dates. The chain of evidence. What we had. What we still needed. When Daniel came downstairs at 7 and found me at the table with 3 pages of notes and a second pot of coffee already on, he stopped in the doorway. You've been up all night, he said. Yes, I said. Sit down. He sat. We are not going to the local sheriff, I said. Roy Pruitt's family has been protecting this town's version of itself for 3 generations. His grandfather's name may be in what we find. We bypass him entirely. I turned the notebook to face Daniel. State Police. Vermont State Police. Major Crimes Unit. Directly. My father's name. Will be in the record, I said. Yes. I know. He was quiet. I know that's hard, I said. And I meant it. I meant it genuinely, because whatever else Daniel had done wrong, the weight of his father's confession was a real and serious burden, and I did not dismiss it. But Warren Cross had a daughter. She's somewhere in this world, having lived her whole life without her father and without the truth. That matters more. Daniel looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. Okay, he said. There is one more thing, I said. Before we go to the state police, I want to go back to Ozias Fenn. I think he knows more than he showed me. I went back to the library the next morning. Ozias Fenn was at his desk when I walked in. He looked up and then looked at me for a long, assessing moment. I had the sense of a man taking a measurement. I need to tell you something, I said. And then I need to ask you something. I told him what Daniel had told me. Not everything, not the most personal details, but the essential shape of it. The 7 men. Warren Cross. The property. The markers along the tree line. Ozias listened without interrupting. Without changing expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up. Come with me, he said. He led me to the back room. Past the folders I had seen before, past the filing cabinets, to a shelf in the far corner that held cardboard boxes in various states of age. He reached up to the highest shelf and brought down a box I had not seen on my previous visit. It was sealed with tape that had yellowed and dried to brittleness. He set it on the table and peeled the tape away with the careful hands of a man who had been saving something for a long time. Inside the box was a larger folder than the one he had shown me before. More clippings. Photocopies of land registry documents, the transfer of town-owned parcels in the years surrounding Cross's disappearance, at prices well below any reasonable valuation. Financial records from the town's general fund showing unexplained disbursements over a period of 6 years. And a letter. Handwritten. Warren Cross's handwriting. I recognized it from the clipping. Dated 3 weeks before he disappeared. Addressed to the Burlington attorney he had contacted. It had never been sent. Someone had found it in his house after he vanished and had brought it, in those desperate early days of the investigation, to the only person in town they trusted not to make it disappear. A friend of his brought it to me in 1988, Ozias said quietly. The friend's name was Carl Brewer and he died in 2003. He brought it to me because he didn't know what else to do with it. He didn't trust the sheriff. He didn't trust the selectman. He brought it to the librarian because librarians are supposed to be safe. He looked at the letter on the table. I kept it. For 37 years I kept it, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone I could give it to who could actually do something. He looked at me steadily. Small towns are not good at holding their own accountable. They need someone from outside. Someone with nothing to protect here. You knew, I said. All this time you knew. I knew enough, he said. And I couldn't prove enough. And I was afraid enough. He met my eyes without flinching. I am not proud of the afraid part. But that's the truth of it. I looked down at the letter. Warren Cross's handwriting. Clear and careful and completely unaware that it would spend nearly 4 decades in a box on a library shelf before anyone read it who could act on it. In the letter, he named names. 6 of the 7 men from the photograph. Listed the records he had found. Described the patterns of misappropriation clearly and in detail. Asked the Burlington attorney to advise him on how to proceed safely. He had been careful. He had been thorough. He had done everything right. It hadn't mattered. I picked up the letter with both hands and held it carefully. I'm going to the state police today, I said. Ozias Fenn nodded. Take the box, he said. All of it. I've been waiting to give it to someone for a very long time. I need to tell you about Warren Cross's daughter before I tell you about the investigation. Because she is the most important part of this story. More important than the legal proceedings. More important than the convictions. Her name was Renata Cross. She was 51 years old and lived in Portland, Maine, where she ran a small landscape architecture firm and had, by all visible measures, built a solid and independent life out of the rubble of losing her father at the age of 14. I found her through old town records and a patient afternoon of searching. I found her business website, her email address. I wrote and deleted that first email 6 times. What do you say to a woman to tell her that the father she lost 37 years ago has been waiting under the ground 2 hours from where she grew up? What words exist for that? What formulation of language is adequate to the weight of it? In the end, I wrote something plain and honest. I told her who I was. I told her what I lived in and what I had found. I told her that there were people who knew what had happened to her father, and that those people were finally prepared to say so on the record. She called me 20 minutes after I sent the email. When I answered, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, in a voice that was very controlled and very steady in the way that only people who have been holding themselves together for decades can sound steady, "I have been waiting my whole life for this phone call." She drove to Harlow Creek on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks after the state police had opened their investigation. I met her at the library, which felt right, the place where the evidence had been kept, where Osius Fenn had held the watch for all those years. She was tall, with her father's eyes. I knew them from the photograph, that particular warmth and directness, and a composure about her that I recognized immediately. The composure of a woman who has survived something enormous and organized her entire life around making sure the size of that thing never gets to flatten her again. She wore it the way some women wear armor, not to look invincible, but because they have learned that the only way to carry certain things is upright. We sat together for 2 hours. I showed her the letter. Her father's handwriting, clear on the page. I showed her the documents from the box. I told her what Daniel had told me. All of it, including the part about his father, including the part about why we had come to this town. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I was done, she looked at the letter in her father's handwriting for a long time. Just looked at it. Not reading it anymore. She had read it twice through, just looking at the physical fact of his handwriting on paper. "He was going to do the right thing," she said finally. "He knew it would make people angry. He knew it was dangerous. He did it anyway." A pause. "He was always like that. Something could be wrong and he couldn't leave it alone. It was the thing about him that used to drive me crazy when I was little and that I have missed every day of my adult life." I thought of Greta Sims. "You don't leave cats." "He sounds like a remarkable person," I said. She looked up. "He was just a person," she said. "He was just someone who tried to do the right thing." Her voice stayed steady. "That should not have been enough to get him killed." "No," I said. "It shouldn't have." She nodded. She picked up the letter and folded it very carefully, the way you handle something that is both fragile and precious. Then she set it down. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving it alone." The Vermont State Police Major Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation in October. I will not walk you through every procedural detail because investigations are slow and grinding and belong, in their detail, to the legal record. What I will tell you is what I saw and what I felt, and where things stood when the dust finally settled. A forensic team examined the back acre of our property in mid-October. It was a cold, overcast Wednesday. Daniel and I stood on the back porch and watched the investigators move across the property with equipment I recognized from news coverage of similar cases and had never expected to see in my own backyard. I held Daniel's hand. I don't know exactly when I had decided to hold his hand through this part. Sometime in the days between his confession and now. Somewhere in the long, difficult, honest conversations we had been having at the kitchen table in the early mornings when neither of us could sleep, conversations that were different from any we had had before in 7 years of marriage. Less careful, more real, the kind of talking that happens when the performance of a thing has finally been stripped down to the thing itself. He had been wrong. He had brought me here under false pretenses and withheld something I had a right to know. I had told him this plainly and he had accepted it plainly, without deflection or justification, which was the only response that had any chance of being enough. We were not repaired. Repair is not an event. It is a direction. We were facing the right direction. The forensic team found Warren Cross on the northeastern corner of the property, 14 feet from the first marker. Exactly where the Aldrich daughter had sleepwalked to, year after year, waking with her hands in the dirt. I stood on the porch when they confirmed the finding, and I felt something move through me that I don't entirely have words for. Grief for a man I had never met. Relief that the truth was finally standing upright. And something older and stranger than both. The particular feeling of standing in a place where something that was hidden has been made visible, where the shape of the truth has finally been allowed to match the shape of what actually happened. 2 of the 7 men from the photograph were still alive. One was 83 years old and living in a care facility outside Burlington. The other was Harold Carver, 79 years old, retired selectman, resident of Harlow Creek's Main Street for 50 years. A man the town regarded as a harmless, benevolent elder. A man who sat in the front row at town meetings and donated to the library fund and had, for nearly 4 decades, been living 2 miles from the place where Warren Cross was buried. Both men were charged. Harold Carver, when the officers arrived at his door on a Tuesday morning in November, looked at them for a long moment without surprise. "I wondered," he said, "when this day would come." He said nothing else. Roy Pruitt was investigated separately for obstruction. Specifically, for the question of whether he had known about the original crime and chosen to protect the town's version of events. The investigation concluded that Roy himself had no direct knowledge of the 1987 murder, but had been aware of irregularities in the historical case file and had made the deliberate choice not to pursue them. He resigned as sheriff in January. I watched him leave his office on a gray winter morning from the window of the diner across the street. He walked to his truck without looking at anyone, got in, and drove away. I felt no satisfaction in it. Only a tired, clear-eyed acknowledgement of the cost of choosing the past over the truth for long enough that the two become indistinguishable. Robert Voss's name appeared in the formal record. It is public. It is part of the official account. Daniel gave a full statement to investigators. Every detail, every word his father had spoken at that kitchen table when Daniel was 19 years old. He did not soften it or edit it. I asked him, the night before he gave the statement, if he was sure. He said yes. I asked him why. He said, because Warren Cross had a daughter. And she deserves the full story. Not the version that's easier for my family. I looked at my husband. And I thought, there you are. There is the person I chose. Renata Cross came back to Harlow Creek in the spring. Not to stay. Her life was in Portland. Her work, her friends, the world she had rebuilt from the ground up after the world she was supposed to have been taken from her at 14. She came for a day. A Thursday in late April, when the snow had finally retreated and the ground was soft and the trees were just beginning to show the first pale green of new leaves. She stood on the back acre for a long time. In the place where the markers had been, which was now just grass and returning earth and the quiet sound of the creek. Daniel and I stood on the porch and gave her the space to do that. Neither of us spoke. Some moments belong entirely to the person who is living them. After a while she turned around and looked at the house and then at us. He would have loved this land, she said. He always wanted space. Room to grow things. He had plans for a proper vegetable garden, but we were always in rented places, and it never seemed worth starting something you couldn't finish. She looked at the tree line. He would have put a garden here. She looked at the northeast corner of the yard. The specific patch of ground. Plant something there, she said. Something that lasts. We planted an oak tree in May. Renata chose the variety, a red oak, native to Vermont, the kind that takes decades to establish itself and centuries to reach its full size. She drove back from Portland for the planting. The 3 of us did it together. Renata chose the spot. Daniel dug the hole. I held the sapling while it went into the ground, and then all 3 of us filled the earth back in around the roots. Greta Sims came over the fence to watch. She stood at the edge of the yard with her arms folded and her coffee mug and did not say anything until we were done. Then she said, "Good." Just that. Good. It was, in its way, everything. I stood back and looked at the small tree in the April light. It was barely taller than I was. You could circle the trunk with one hand. It looked, honestly, like it might not survive the first Vermont winter. It would, though. I knew it would. Some things that look fragile at the start have the kind of roots that go deeper than you can see. It is now 1 year since Daniel and I arrived in Harlow Creek, Vermont. Let me tell you where things stand. Harold Carver and the surviving member of the group pled guilty in September. The sentencing was in November, both men in their late 70s and 80s, and the judge acknowledged the complexity of that, but acknowledged it without allowing it to erase the weight of what had been done. The sentences were meaningful. They were on the record. Renata Cross has been in contact with the town's historical committee about a formal acknowledgement of her father's death and his role in uncovering the financial misconduct, a recognition that he was not, as the 1987 record had it, a man who walked away from his life. He was a man who tried to do the right thing and was killed for it. The town is still working through what that acknowledgement looks like. These things move slowly, but they are moving. Osius Fenn retired in December. He came to the house for dinner the week before he left and sat at our kitchen table and ate pot roast and talked about a book he was writing about the history of Harlow Creek. The real history, all of it, in full. He said he had been gathering material for 40 years and had more than enough. He just needed now to believe someone would want to read it. Will people want to read it? I asked. He smiled at his plate. People always want the truth eventually, he said. They just need to be convinced it won't kill them. Greta Sims is still next door. Still has her wood stove on by 7 and still makes too much coffee and still talks in layers. Surface first and then the middle and then the underneath. She came over unannounced one evening in October with a bottle of wine and sat on our porch and looked out at the valley and said, after a long quiet, "This is the first time I have sat on this side of the road and felt entirely comfortable." I understood what she meant. Roy Pruitt is living in Burlington now. I don't know much about his life there. I don't feel the need to. My leave of absence from social work ended in January. I went back to it. Differently. With more clarity about what I could carry and what I needed to put down. With more honesty with myself about the line between doing what's right and doing what you can justify calling right. The distinction matters. I had blurred it once. I will not blur it again. And Daniel. I will not pretend our marriage emerged from this year undamaged. That would be dishonest, and I have promised myself, in the wake of all of it, that I am through with dishonesty. The kind I practiced on other people and the kind I practiced on myself. Our marriage is real. It is honest now in a way it was not before. It has been stripped of the carefully maintained surfaces we were both, in our different ways, sustaining. What is underneath those surfaces is less polished and more true. Some mornings it is hard. Some mornings it is the best thing I have. We stayed. I know that still surprises people. When I've told this story to people who know me, Margot, my old colleagues, my therapist who I started seeing in November and who has been excellent about not telling me what to feel, the first question is always some version of, "Why did you stay?" And my answer is this. I stayed because leaving is not automatically braver than remaining. Because the people I know who have done the hardest work of their lives did it inside the thing they were trying to save, not after walking away from it. Because Daniel did something wrong and told me the truth about it when it mattered and has been doing, since then, the uncomfortable daily work of being different. And because I am not myself without fault, and I know what it is to be loved by someone who could have used your fault against you and chose instead to hold it beside you. We are not a perfect marriage. We are a real one. On the first morning of November, Daniel and I stood at the west-facing corner of the porch with our coffee and looked at the valley below Harlow Creek in the pale fall light. The leaves were gone. The trees were bare. The valley was brown and gray and still, waiting for winter. "Do you regret it?" I asked him. "Coming here." He thought about it. Actually thought about it, in the serious way he has when the question deserves it. "No," he said. "I regret how I came here. I regret what I didn't tell you." He looked at the valley. "But I don't regret what happened because of it." I thought about Warren Cross in his photograph, hand raised against the sun on the front porch of this house. Renata standing on the back acre in the April light. The oak tree, small and certain, putting its roots into the northeastern corner of the yard. I thought about Ozias and his box. About the 37 years it had waited. About the things that get buried and the things that eventually, insistently, find their way to the surface. Neither do I said. The wind came down the valley and moved through the bare branches, and the town below us sat in its morning quiet. Ordinary, self-contained, the same as it had looked on the day we arrived. But I knew it differently now. You always know a place differently once you have stood on its underneath.